The manager's smile was the first thing you noticed. It was a well-built thing, practiced and polished, designed to absorb bad news before it could ricochet around the room. He slid the cashier's check across the wide mahogany desk. The paper was crisp, the number precise. $400.00. That settles everything, Mr. Cole. The smile remained, a corporate fixture. Frank Cole did not take the check. His hands, resting on his knees, were thick with the kind of stillness that comes from a lifetime of working with wood and steel. They were clean, but the lines in his knuckles held a permanent shadow of grease and soil. He looked at the check, then at the young manager, a man half his age named Harris, whose suit probably cost more than the check itself. He said nothing. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his worn canvas coat and pulled out a single folded document. The paper was old, yellowed at the creases, the kind of thing you find in a shoebox at the bottom of a closet. He unfolded it slowly, deliberately, the sound of the stiff paper crackling in the quiet, air-conditioned office. He pushed it across the desk, covering the bank's check entirely. Harris's smile tightened by a fraction of a degree. He picked up the paper, his movements quick and efficient. He read the ornate typewritten text. His eyes scanned the date. May 12th, 1967. He saw the words bearer bond and County Trust Bank. A small, dismissive laugh escaped him, a puff of air. Sir, this isn't negotiable here. It's an antique. A collectible, maybe. County Trust hasn't existed for 30 years. He started to fold it back up, ready to hand it back to end this curious interruption to his Tuesday. Frank spoke, his voice low and even, not a challenge, but a statement of fact. The account you closed was tied to this. His finger, blunt and sure, tapped a single paragraph of dense text on the lower half of the bond. Harris stopped. His hands froze on the paper. The room, which had been filled with the soft hum of computers and distant phones, went silent. The smile was gone. Mr. Harris leaned back, attempting to reclaim the professional distance that had served him so well. He put the old bond down on the desk as if it were a strange and possibly contagious artifact. He was a product of a system that valued smooth resolutions. Problems were categorized, rooted, and solved, usually with a form or a fee. This old man with his document did not fit any category. Frank Cole just sat, waiting. He wore work boots, scuffed but clean, dust on the cuffs of his jeans. His shirt was pressed. He was not a man who had wandered in off the street in confusion. The narrator could see it in his posture. This was a man who had made an appointment. Harris cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. As I said, Mr.
Cole, the bank in question, County Trust, was acquired by Global Financial Corporation in 1992. As part of that merger, all outstanding local instruments of this nature were reconciled. The accounts were settled, the obligations voided. It's standard procedure. He was reciting from a script he had learned in a training seminar. The words were polished, designed to build a wall of institutional certainty. He tried the smile again, this time aiming for paternalistic sympathy. I understand this might have sentimental value. I could have our archival department see if it's worth anything to a collector. It was a generous offer, meant to dismiss and placate in a single motion. Frank did not seem to hear the offer. He watched the manager with a placid intensity. His gaze wasn't threatening, merely observant. He was watching a man talk himself into a corner, one well-intentioned, incorrect statement at a time. The name Frank Cole meant nothing to the manager. He was just a closed account number, a small fry portfolio being streamlined. To the system, he was an inefficiency that had now been corrected. But Frank Cole was not confused. He was prepared. He had been preparing for this conversation, or one like it, for most of his adult life. At his feet, unseen by Harris, was an old leather satchel. It was heavy, not with money, but with paper.
the kind of paper that institutions forget and men like Frank Cole remember. To understand the paper on the desk, you have to go back, not just to the merger of 1992, but all the way back to 1983, 22 years before that morning in the bank. Frank was a younger man then, strong and lean, helping his father clear out the old barn that stood behind their house. His father, Thomas Cole, was a man carved from the same quiet, patient wood as his son, but the years had worn him down. A sickness was in him, a slow thief, and he had begun the long, methodical process of putting his affairs in order.
It was a hot August afternoon. The air in the barn was thick with the smell of hay dust, old oil, and time itself. They worked in comfortable silence for hours, sorting tools, stacking lumber, creating piles of what to keep and what to let go. Late in the day, his father stopped. He walked over to a dark corner, behind a stack of old tires, and pried up a loose floorboard. From the dark space beneath, he lifted a small, heavy metal lockbox, coated in a fine layer of dust and rust. He brought it over to the workbench and blew the dust off the top. The key was on his ring, small and silver. He unlocked the box and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, was the bearer bond. Thomas Cole picked it up with a reverence Frank had rarely seen him display. He explained what it was. "This isn't about money, Frank. It's about a promise." In 1967, the County Trust Bank wanted to build their new modern branch, the one that still stood on Main Street. They owned the land for the building, but they needed an access road along the back of the property, a thin strip, 12 feet wide. It was our land, the edge of our pasture back then. They came to me, wanted to buy it. I said no. Thomas Cole was not a man who sold land. He was a man who kept it. So they made a different deal. They didn't buy the land. They leased it, in perpetuity. The payment was small, almost nothing, $47 a year. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. They got to use the road, and in exchange, they acknowledged that the land was ours. This bond is the contract, the lease, and the payment was deposited directly into a special account at their bank. Account number 417. As long as they make the payment, the land is theirs to use. He looked his son in the eye, his gaze firm. If they ever stop, for any reason, the lease is broken. The land reverts to us, and everything on it. He passed the bond to Frank. "Your job is just to keep that account open. Don't touch the money, just let it sit there. Let them pay their rent." It was a lesson, a quiet instruction in patience and memory. This was why Frank Cole sat in the manager's office 30 years later, unmoved by talk of mergers and standard procedures. It was not about the $400. It was not even, in its deepest sense, about the land. It was about his father. Thomas Cole had been a man whose word was his bond, and he believed that the ink on paper was a sacred thing. He was a farmer and a mechanic, a man who understood the physical world of torque and soil. The abstract world of finance and law was a foreign country to him, one he viewed with suspicion. He'd had one run-in with the town council in the 70s over a zoning variance. They had outmaneuvered him with bylaws and procedural motions he didn't understand. He lost a piece of his frontage to a road-widening project. He never forgot the feeling of being dismissed, of being told that the rules he lived by didn't apply in their world. After that, he taught Frank a simple lesson. Do your homework. Know the paper better than they do, because they count on you not to. The strip of land itself was a ghost on the modern town map. It ran right behind the bank, a narrow ribbon of earth that now formed the backbone of their employee parking lot and, more critically, the secure access lane used by armoured cars. Without it, the bank's daily operations would be crippled. Frank knew this. He had walked the line 100 times over the years. This small battle was for his father's memory. It was a way of righting that old wrong from the 70s, of proving that a promise made to Thomas Cole
could not simply be erased by a corporate acquisition. There was another layer to it.
His wife Sarah, who had passed 5 years ago from an illness that was the opposite of his father's, sudden and swift, had always known about the account. It became a small, recurring piece of their life's quiet narrative. Every spring she would ask, "Did the bank pay its rent this year, Frank?" He would check the passbook, see the small deposit, and nod. It was a ritual, a connection to a past they both honored. Closing the account wasn't a clerical issue. It was a severance. It was the institution in its blind, careless efficiency, declaring that his father's agreement, his memory, and the small ritual he and Sarah had shared were all null and void. The $400 in the account were the accumulated payments of nearly a decade, untouched. To the bank, it was a dormant, trivial sum. To Frank, it was proof. It was 55 years of receipts. Back in the manager's office, the air had grown thick with misunderstanding. Harris, having exhausted his script on standard procedure, shifted his weight. His confidence was still there, but it was thinner now, stretched taut over a growing unease. He looked at the bond, then at Frank. "Sir, I understand this has sentimental value, but this is from the old county trust. We are Global Financial Corporation. When we acquired them in 1992, all prior local agreements were voided and settled. Standard procedure." He repeated the phrase as if it were an incantation that could make the old man and his paper disappear. Frank did not argue the point. He did not raise his voice. He simply leaned down and opened the leather satchel at his feet. The clasps clicked open with a soft metallic sound. From it, he retrieved a book. It was not a novel or a Bible. It was a thin volume, professionally bound in dark blue vinyl, the kind of thing a county clerk's office produces. The gold lettering on the spine was faded but legible. GFC/County Trust Acquisition Filing, 1992. He placed the book on the desk. He did not open it randomly. He flipped to a page he had marked long ago with a thin strip of paper. He turned the book around and pushed it across the desk toward Harris. His finger pointed to a line of text on a page titled Schedule C, Assumed Liabilities and Encumbrances. The page was a dense list of outstanding loans and commercial liens, but at the very bottom, the last item, typed on a different machine than the rest, was an addendum. Item 247, Land Lease Agreement, Parcel 7B, T. Cole, recorded 1967. Underlined in his father's neat graphite pencil line. Frank spoke again, his voice as calm as before. "It looks like you bought the agreement, not voided it." Harris stared at the line. He read it once, and then again. The words were plain, unambiguous, an encumbrance, an assumed liability. The smile, the well-built professional thing that had been his primary tool, finally collapsed. It vanished completely, leaving behind the pale, uncertain face of a young man who had just realized the procedures he believed in were built on a foundation of sand. He looked from the book to Frank, and for the first time, he saw not a confused old man, but someone who knew the terrain far better than he did. Harris, stripped of his procedural certainty, did what institutional men always do. He escalated. He picked up his phone, his movements now jerky and uncertain. He pressed a button for his direct line to the regional office. A moment later, a voice filled the room via speakerphone. It was smooth, confident, and utterly devoid of warmth. "This is Mark from Legal. What's the issue, Stephen?" Harris, whose name was apparently Stephen, quickly explained the situation, his voice a little too high. He described the old man, the bond, the account. He left out the part about the acquisition filing Frank had produced. The lawyer on the phone, Mark, chuckled. It was a dry, dismissive sound. "Prescriptive rights, Steve. It's not even a question." The lawyer launched into his argument. It was a classic institutional defense. They had used the land openly, continuously, and without permission for more than the statutory period of 20 years.
Therefore, under the principle of adverse possession or a prescriptive easement, the land was now effectively theirs. The original agreement was irrelevant. He's abandoned his claim by not enforcing it for, 30+ years since the merger. Tell him we're sorry for the confusion, but the parking lot is ours. The confidence in the lawyer's voice was absolute. It was the sound of a man who had won this argument 100 times before. He was not arguing with Frank. He was issuing a verdict. Frank listened to the entire explanation without interruption. He let the disembodied voice fill the office with its polished, unassailable logic.
When the lawyer finally paused, waiting for Harris to relay the message and end the foolishness, Frank leaned forward slightly. He spoke toward the phone on the desk. They didn't use it without permission. He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. They used it with permission, and they paid for that permission, every year, for 55 years. The last payment was 3 months ago. You can't claim adverse possession on a property you're renting. A new silence descended, this one from the speakerphone. The confident legal mind on the other end was processing this new data point. The entire foundation of his argument, that the use was hostile, without permission, had just been vaporized. Harris looked at Frank, his expression a mixture of panic and dawning respect. He saw the cashier's check for $400 still sitting on the desk, the evidence of the last rent payment. He finally understood. They had not just closed an account, they had broken a lease. He spoke into the phone, his voice barely a whisper. "Mark, he has the payment records." The lawyer's response was a string of unintelligible sputtering, followed by a sharp click as he hung up. Harris, now visibly sweating, turned to Frank. He tried a final, desperate tactic, the practical appeal. "Look, Mr. Cole, this is clearly a clerical oversight, a mistake. What do you want? We can reinstate the account. We can offer you a settlement. $10,000 for the bond. Let's just be reasonable." Frank Cole looked at the desperate young man. He said, "I don't want to be reasonable. I want the agreement honored." The nature of the conversation changed. It was no longer about a dormant account. It was about parcel 7B. Frank said, "I think we need the county surveyor." The suggestion was not a request. Harris, out of his depth, could only nod in agreement. A meeting was arranged for the following morning. The scene shifted from the sterile, modern bank office to the dusty, quiet archives of the county records building. The room smelled of old paper and binding glue. The bank sent a new representative, not Mark from legal, but a senior corporate attorney from the city, a woman named Ms. Jennings. She wore a dark, severe suit and an expression of profound annoyance. She saw this as a rural nuisance to be swatted away before lunch. Frank was there, with his satchel, and with them was George Pike, the county surveyor. Pike was a man in his late 70s, with hands as weathered as Frank's and eyes that had spent 50 years translating the legal fictions of deeds and titles into the hard reality of fence posts and boundary stones. He had known Frank's father. He nodded to Frank, a small, quiet acknowledgement of shared history. Jennings began, her voice sharp. "We believe there is a misunderstanding regarding a prescriptive easement." Pike ignored her. He was the neutral verifier, and his process was his own. He asked Frank for the bond. Frank laid it on the large wooden table. Pike then had a clerk bring 2 maps. The first was a huge linen-backed parcel map from 1967. Its lines were drawn in India ink. The second was a modern, digitally printed survey. Pike unrolled both, laying the new one over the old. They were different worlds. The old map showed fields and pasture. The new one showed parking lots and buildings. But the property lines, the fundamental bones of the landscape, were the same. Pike took out a wooden ruler and a magnifying glass. He read the legal description from the bond aloud, his voice a low monotone. A strip of land 12 feet in width, running east to west for a distance of 940 feet, abutting the southern boundary of parcel 7A.
He traced the line with his finger on the old map. Then he found the same line on the new one.
It ran directly under the bank's access road, clipping the corner of the main building's foundation. He looked at Miss Jennings. The bond is tied to this parcel. The description is perfect. He then pointed to the clause Frank had shown Harris. He read it slowly. Should payment cease for a period greater than 90 days, this lease shall be considered null and void, and the property, along with any and all permanent improvements thereon, shall revert to the full and unencumbered possession of the lessor or his heirs. Pike looked up from the paper, his gaze moving from Jennings to Frank. He spoke the final, decisive sentence, not as an opinion, but as a fact. The clause is standard for its era. It's an ironclad reversionary clause. The bank's lawyer went pale. The words, permanent improvements, hung in the air. It meant the asphalt, the concrete curbs, the security fencing, the high-intensity lighting, and a piece of the bank's foundation, the entire infrastructure of their branch's security and logistics. All of it was sitting on land that, as of 90 days after the last failed payment, no longer belonged to them. The dynamic in the room inverted. The institutional power, embodied by the sharp-suited lawyer from the city, evaporated. Miss Jennings understood the catastrophic implications immediately. The cost to excavate and relocate their secure access road and modify the building's foundation would be millions. The operational disruption would be a nightmare, shutting down the branch for months. The leverage was absolute. She looked at Frank Cole, truly seeing him for the first time. He was no longer a rural nuisance. He was the man who held the keys to her client's $14 million building. She asked for a moment alone with him. George Pike and the clerk quietly left the room. The lawyer dropped all pretense. Her voice was now low, pragmatic, all business. Mr. Cole, clearly the bank has made a serious error. We are prepared to correct it. What's your number to sell us the parcel? Let's settle this right now. She was ready for a negotiation, a game she was good at. Frank just looked at her. He said nothing. She took his silence as a negotiating tactic. All right, let's not waste time. I am authorized to offer you $250,000 cash for a 12-foot strip of land. It was a massive opening offer designed to signal seriousness and end the conversation quickly. Frank's reply was quiet, but it landed with the force of a hammer blow. It's not for sale. Jennings was stunned into silence. She had negotiated deals for skyscrapers, for corporate mergers worth billions. She had never encountered a response like this. Everything is for sale, Mr. Cole. She tried to recalibrate to find a different angle. This is a life-changing amount of money for... She stopped herself before she could say something condescending. She tried again. What do you want then? Name it. A different property? A business line? Frank's answer was simple. I want the account reopened and the annual payment made. The lawyer stared at him bewildered. She could not process his motivation. It did not compute in her world of financial leverage and asset valuation. You were turning down $250,000 for a $47 a year payment? She asked the question slowly, as if speaking to a child or a madman. Frank did not elaborate. He did not explain about his father or his wife or the principle of a promise kept. He let her sit with the impossibility of it. Seeing her confusion, Jennings made one last desperate push. She leaned in, a voice a conspiratorial whisper. Mr. Cole, the building on that property, our branch, is assessed at over $14 million. Your claim gives you control over the entire asset. Don't you understand what that means? You could ask for 7 figures. 8. I can probably get you $1 million today. She thought that by revealing the true scale of his power, she could tempt him into her world, the world where everything has a price. Frank met her gaze. He spoke with a quiet finality that left no room for negotiation. The agreement my father signed wasn't about selling. It was about renting. And it was about honoring the paper. There was nothing left to negotiate.
The bank's lawyer returned to the city and reported the failure. The bank's executives, faced with a problem that could not be solved with money, were forced into a position they hadn't occupied in decades: total surrender. The risk of litigation was too great. Not only would they lose, but the story would be a public relations disaster. A multi-billion-dollar corporation foreclosing on a dead man's $47 lease agreement. They had no choice. They capitulated. The resolution, when it came, was as quiet and anticlimactic as Frank himself. He was called back to the bank branch a week later. The office he entered was the same, but the atmosphere was entirely different. Mr. Harris was gone. In his place sat an older woman, a senior vice president of regional operations, who had been flown in specifically for this meeting. She looked nervous. Her smile was genuine and terrified. She did not offer Frank a seat. She stood, holding a small stack of paperwork. "Mr. Cole, on behalf of Global Financial, I want to offer our sincerest apologies for the error." She spoke the words carefully, as if they might break. She slid a document across the desk. It was an official letter reinstating account number 417, retroactive to the date of its closure. She then produced a new passbook, the old-fashioned kind they didn't even issue anymore. She had to have it specially made. She opened it for him. The first entry was dated that morning, a deposit, credit, $47. She pushed the book toward him. Frank picked it up. He looked at the fresh blue ink, the single line that made everything right again. He nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible movement. He closed the passbook and placed it in the inside pocket of his coat, the same pocket where the bond had been. He then took the old bond from his satchel, the paper that had started it all. He folded it carefully along its original creases and placed it back inside. He did not say thank you. He did not smile. He did not acknowledge the woman's apology. The transaction was complete. The promise was whole again. He turned and walked out of the bank, the soft chime of the door announcing his departure. The narrator watched him go. Some men collect problems. He collected patience. Done. Frank drove home, not to the old farmhouse which had been sold years ago, but to a small, neat house on the edge of town. He sat at his kitchen table as the late afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. The new passbook lay on the table in front of him. He ran a thumb over the crisp cover. The door opened, and his son, Michael, came in, home from his job at the local garage. He was a good man, with his mother's easy smile and his father's steady hands. He saw the passbook on the table. Did it work? Frank didn't answer with words. He simply pushed the book across the table. Michael picked it up and opened it. He saw the single entry for $47. A slow smile spread across his face. He shook his head in quiet wonder. Grandpa would have liked that. He would have liked that a lot. Frank looked out the window past his small yard to the fields beyond, fields much like the ones his father had worked his entire life. He thought of the strip of land behind the bank, the land he now leased to them for the price of a tank of gas. He thought of the lesson his father had taught him in the dusty barn all those years ago. Some things are planted for the next man, he said, his voice just above a whisper. Frank Cole didn't want the bank's building or its money. He just wanted the promise kept. It took 55 years, but the paper held. Sometimes the oldest ink is the strongest. But paper can be forged too. In Ohio, a woman named Maria Sanchez bought a house at a sheriff's sale. She got the deed, the keys, everything. But when she opened a wall during a renovation, she found another deed, hidden there since 1928, a deed with a different name on it, and a single handwritten clause that would put the entire county's record-keeping on trial. We'll see what holds. Stay with us.